Okay, here we go. This is a burrito. And just for some filmmaking techniques, I shot all this just after everything was said and done. I kind of give it away with the shirt I'm wearing. But doing some acting with my hands, I realize a butter knife is not going to cut it. No pun intended. But so this was born out of a conversation that I had with some friends about crazy videos we could make. And one of the ideas we came up with was, hey, why don't we make a guillotine to cut a burrito? But it was just like a chit chatty conversation. Then after a few minutes, I said, you know what? If no one's going to make that, I'm making it. And so I decided to do that. And I really had a clear vision of what the video should look like and what the guillotine should look like. And this is some old wood that Tim Sway gave me. This is old wood that was on a deck. It seems like mahogany. But right there is where my GoPro died. You see it sitting there, and you notice it doesn't have a red dot on it. And GoPros, I'm slowly giving up on GoPros altogether. They just are too problematic. I really like the DJI lately. I've been using the DJI action camera. Well, here you see some glue. This used to be a deck, and it was glued down to whatever ribs were holding the deck in place. So that you notice I'm cutting away all the bad stuff and place of the good stuff. And now I'm making, I think I'm making like what's going to be like for the head. Oh yeah, that's right. You see me scribing there. And I'm using the band. So I'm actually just holding them together. I don't think I glued them. Definitely didn't glue them. I was just holding them together. Something like that is not so bad to hold together. And in between that shot and this shot, I thinned those out a little bit. And I'm just freestyling this. I had a pretty good vision of what it should look like. I am not actually working off any plans. It's a lot of people always say to me, "Oh, do you have plans for that?" And all these dimensions and all these moments you see, I'm just literally making them up as I go along. Occasionally, if I make a bad cut, I'll just start over and make the piece again. And that's a piece of brass. That's just a piece of scrap brass I had, and I'm using that as a to ride inside the rails. You'll see what I mean right now. So I'm gonna glue those. I intended on pinning them, and I never got to doing it. By the time the video was done, I completely forgot to do that. I was gonna drill and pin those, and it's something I should have done because now, after slamming it down a few times, both of those pieces are loose. But you see, I glue that bottom one down, and I put the brass in it just to keep it lined up. So the top one that slides up and down is the one that got loose. You'll notice, if you back up the frame just a second, you'll notice the bottom only has a couple of little pieces in it just to align it, because I knew I was going to use that whole surface area to glue it together. So that's why you see me just squirting that. That's the thin CA glue, and I glued it from the back just off camera too. And there you see what I'm talking about. And those rails that I should have pinned are going to come loose later, but you will never notice it. But so there you see. That's it. The burrito's head is going to go in there. I almost didn't even need to do that, but just for authenticity, that's why I do that. And because it's a prop, it's not a piece of fine furniture. I CA glue it, and then I think I drill and screw it later. Oh, I do it right now. I drill and screw it right there and then. I do that a lot. I'll glue something in place, and then this is the top, this is the other end. And I put a spacer in there just to maintain the heights there. And now that I don't glue because I have to remove it later to put the cutting blade in there, the actual guillotine blade. And I just made this off camera with a little piece of cardboard, just so I know. And now I take the drawing home, or the sketch of the piece of cardboard, and I draw it in Illustrator. Everyone's always extremely curious about how I draw. I draw in Illustrator, and I just need vectors, combined shapes, and images, and then I just turn that into a cut file on the plasma table. And that's it. That's 1095 steel. That's real deal steel, and that's just a 2x72 belt grinder, and I just put a one-sided bevel on it. I get it pretty sharp straight away, but I still need to harden the metal. And there it is. And if you guys don't know Joe Pye has a great YouTube channel. He's a very skilled machinist and a very skilled teacher as well. So go check out Joe Pye's YouTube channel, and he talks about how to secure metal like that in a drill press. And he did it because he watched me not secure it in a drill press. So it's a funny little video of him kind of talking to me but not mentioning my name. And so I did that with Joe in mind. And so you see, I just pulled it out of the even heat oven, got it up to 1500 degrees. I think it was a whole time for like 3 minutes. Then dunked into Parks 50 hardening oil. And now I'm tempering it in this toaster oven for about 3 hours. And now I'm just showing you how I am using the chop saw to make a dado cut. And you see what I'm doing there. I'm just making a quick dado. And I could see what I'm doing, which is, unlike if I used a sled, I wouldn't really be able to see what I'm doing. Now I'm making the base. And now here I'm just going to kind of, these base parts are going to grab together. They call those lap joints. I don't know what those are called. Gotta check with the wood whisperer, he'll tell you. I'm just CA gluing them in place. Again, this is not going to be a piece of fine furniture. Now I'm using epoxy. I made a bunch of things on the laser and I was left with these little tiny discs of cardboard, and I kept them for this exact reason, and they've come in handy. I keep them around. I'll use them up eventually if I ever need it. I'll make more intentionally, but they were the cutout from something that I did. Now these are the angled members that are going to keep the guillotine up, and I'm just epoxy and a nail. That's it. Again, no fine furniture here. This is just a prop. I am screwing it. I did want to secure it a little bit, but also I like the color break of the brass. So you see that I'm just giving that a pre-drill, little sand, and then a brass screw in there. It's like a number 12 screw, I think. And now I got the blade out, and I'm using, that's my 7 horsepower 3-phase grinder buffer, and I used the Scotch-Brite on one side and the buffing wheel on the other. And you could install that thing if you parked a truck on it. I love it. And now I'm just, the metal was a little bit fat for the wooden grooves that I made, and so I'm using my surface grinder to just thin them down just a little bit. Took off probably about 20 thou just so it fit inside that wooden groove. And now here I'm making what's going to be the head of the drop blade. You notice how I just kept coming up and flipping and cutting, coming up and flipping. And that's why if you have a saw blade that only sticks out of the table 3 inches, you can obviously cut 6 inches if you cut from both sides. And I glued that in place, drilled down. It's typically how you'd place your holes in a knife handle. And now I glue this on, and then I drill through back the other way. And that's how I get placement on everything. That epoxy is now dried, of course. This is several minutes later. And then just for beauty, I have, these are, I don't know, I think this is quarter 20s, I forget. Quarter 20 bolts I cut all the heads off of. And I have eggcorn nuts, or cap nuts, I forget what those are called. I had those left over from the boat build from last year. With McMaster Car, you buy stuff, comes in hundreds, even if you need 3 of them. So, and they're always cool to have around. You never know when you're going to use a quarter 20 cap nut. Now this is that top part I screwed on earlier, and I'm making, before I made the mechanism, I was a little concerned. I didn't want to accidentally hurt myself. So the top of the blade has that piece sticking up, and that is the, you'll see it right there. There you go. I'm just checking the drop. That comes up through there. And you notice I drilled a couple of holes and then I connected them all with a file. And there we go. It's coming up. There we go. It's just a little bit of friction there before I oiled everything. And now they just have a pin. You see I was just cutting some foam. I was very excited that it worked, but I mean, why wouldn't it work? Sharp razor blade. And so now I'm making the mechanism, and I just freestyled this mechanism. Again, a lot of people say, oh, what are the plans? How did you do that? I was just playing around. I had to make a couple of these parts more than once or twice as I worked because I didn't make them properly the first time. And that's going to be the basis of the switch. It's going to just pull in and out. I had this nice chunky piece of brass, and I wanted it to look, that's the piece of brass, and you'll notice I'm sticking it against the bandsaw blade just to give myself a guide as to how this little clip is going to bend around it. And you just give a little bit of help with the bandsaw blade, and there you go, and that's it. And that's 2 of them, and those are the guides that's going to slide in and out of. Just using some solder. This is not silver solder, this is electrical solder. This melts much easier, and that was real crummy solder. You notice it's not flowing very cleanly. Some solder flows beautifully, some doesn't, and if it doesn't flow cleanly, I usually just throw it right in the garbage because it just makes a hassle later. I threw that roll of solder in the garbage as soon as I was done here. Now I'm in my machine shop, which is a separate shop, and I'm putting a little insert spring that's going to live. That's just my Bridgeport mill. And if you heard the podcast one of these days recently, I said to Bob, I said, having a Bridgeport mill is just like having a table saw. Every once in a while, you need to just land a straight cut through the middle of something, and it's nice to have a table saw. Imagine if you had to always go to your CNC to cut a piece of wood. So that's why I like having the Bridgeport around, even though I have a Tormach and everything else. And there you go. You see I'm making the switch. I'm freestyling the switch right now. Solder that on there. Solder, solder, solder. You notice how nicely that flows? That's a different roll of solder. And there you see, and between then, right there, so I'm just freestyling everything in place. And between that shot and this shot, well, actually between this shot and the next shot, I shape everything off camera. So you see that toggle switch is a little unsexy. And so now I'm putting the notch in, grinding that notch, and now you'll notice that that toggle switch becomes sexy because I kind of shaped it. You see how I shaped it a little bit better there? Brought some life into it. It was the same piece from the previous edit, but I just cleaned it all up, filed it, sanded it, got it to look a little bit sexier. And these little screws are all just brass screws from McMaster Carr. I have a bunch of little jars of a bunch of little screws, and there we go. Kaplooey, that works perfect. And now I put my name in it, of course. And then I'm just using ebony or dark brown bry wax is what some people like to say. And it is a stain and a wax in one, and it does not stain the metal, so I just rub it all over everything and then wipe it off. It actually creates a little bit of an oily surface, so it helped make the machine run better. Just tie a little knot in there. Kaplooey, you see everything's working, and it gives it that vintage look. Here we go, just checking, and here we are back in the kitchen, and now it's time to eat my burrito. And there we go. I made the little stands just to hold the burrito, and here we go. I had to put it in the tin foil. Actually, the first time I cut it, the camera wasn't on, of course, because I'm an idiot. And so I wrapped it with tin foil and cut it again. But it doesn't matter. Cutting it in half wasn't all that fun, so that's why I ended up cutting some fruit in half. And this is just a little editing technique, just to overlap the action, boom, eating. Just to get all that information in while something's happening. Just little flashbacks. So this was a fun one. Hope you enjoyed it. And cut the bagel and the butter. That was just to be stupid. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting me here on Patreon. I really appreciate it.